Actually, well, yeah, because so I would love to see some of these courses start to incorporate how to read studies. You know, it's like you see, I know you see it. I think that's kind of how you and I started talking. I think I just left some comments originally on some of your posts where people were like, they were just arguing the point, and it's like they just read the abstract. You didn't read anything else. And I know a lot of people struggle with methodology, populations, what are the subjects, you know, what are the conclusions. They just read the abstract. I don't know. I don't think there's any. I'm sure Martin's course delves into how to read research, but I'm not sure if anyone of the others do.
Yeah, that is super duper niche. You know, there is an audience for that, but man, talking uber nerdery here. But it is really important, and even if it could just be thrown out there in podcasts like this. You know, we talk about anybody can memorize the PICO framework. So you're looking at the population, who's being studied, intervention, you know, what's being tested, and the comparator. What's this intervention being compared to? Is it a placebo control or is it another type of intervention? And the outcome. You know, what are those four things? What's going on with this study? What are we looking at here? So evaluating science and research, once you know the fundamentals of that, then you can kind of branch out into the little details of, you know, what's a better method for evaluating the data and crap like that. But yeah, it is really important for people to be able to distinguish the applicability of a study that's looking at, you know, what's going on in rodents put on X type of diet for whatever the length of time, versus a human study that's basically replicated that model, but came up with a different result. You can't go ahead and cite the rodent study anymore, because now we've got this hypothesis generating rodent research, which is important, but it's preclinical. It's called preclinical for a reason. You got the clinical trials in the humans that once you've got that, then you can safely ditch the animal data. And it also comes down to just having an awareness of where we're at in the evidence base on a given topic. And so I agree with you, man. That is a spot in the education of fitness professionals, just sort of learning some of the real basics of how to evaluate research. That they don't have to become statisticians, but you really have to know what you're looking for in terms of population, intervention, comparator, outcome.
Because to your point, I think Lane posted it this week about, you know, the whole artificial sweetener thing came up again, and everyone was talking about the microbiome. And it's like, those were either in rats or the in vitro studies, but no one read far enough to see that stuff. And then, of course, people are like, well, what's the point of doing those studies if they're not applicable to people? It's like, well, you have to identify certain mechanisms first before we can start to look at what do we want to look at next. Mm-hmm. That's where everyone gets super confused, and then it's just a stalemate of like, well, this says this and this says this, and who the fuck is right?
Yeah, sometimes, man, it just, like at a very basic level, it boils down to asking the question, who was studied? Okay, like what is the profile of these subjects, and how relevant are their characteristics to what I want to know? How relevant are these subjects to me? You know, is it rodents? Is it elderly people? Is it people with a particular disease? Is it athletes? Is it non-athletes? You know, when you ask that question, then you find a lot of the research being waved around is just not relevant to the questions you're asking. You know, so yeah, it's a situation, man. I find that really interesting, and I'm actually just to give you guys a sort of sneak preview here. I am writing a book that is due shortly, and I did. I'm writing a book, and I'm going to cover some of those basics on that, and yeah, hopefully we'll be able to clear some of that up.
Was your protein book like a precursor to be like, hey, I want to do more of this, or was already planned?
That was something that I had been thinking about doing for a while. and it just happened to coincide with me getting approached by a publishing company to write a book. So I've got on the semi down low. I've got a book in the works, and one of the chapters of the book does cover the basics of science. Some people call it science literacy, but we can call it scientific literacy, because there are some basics of scientific literacy that it will help everybody to learn, really, kind of regardless of what field they're in. If they want to know how to kind of sniff out a rat or sniff out some 3-day-old fish in a given study, or a given line of inquiry, I think that stuff is easy to gain some basic skills in.
So are we saying there should be a better way to research? I'm just listening. I'm just like wondering, like, so are we saying that not just the trainers, but in general, we're not looking at the knowledge correctly? Is that what we're saying?
Well, it's like this. Like David and I, we have our nose in the PubMeds all day. So we're already familiar with what studies are most valid and most relevant for our interests. But if you take somebody who doesn't necessarily know right off the top of their head that, oh, this study didn't match protein intake when they compared different carbohydrate and fat amounts, it just knowing what to look for with that, as far as like something fundamental, like, did they match total calories? Did they match protein? Because a lot of I'll just giving you an example, a lot of the research that low carb and keto zealots, or the keto absolutists.
Retards.
Oh, yeah, there's that. A lot of those folks will point to research that fails to equate protein intake between the groups when you're comparing high carb and low carb. And when you fail to equate protein, you fail to equate satiating capacity, capacity to preserve lean body mass, and thermogenic capacity. And so when you fail to equate those elements, you're really not looking at a fair comparison of the research. And now there are so many, there's just such a consistent succession of trials that match protein and calories with vastly differing carbohydrate and fat amounts, showing just nil for differences in body composition over time. And so just not knowing what to look for in that line of research will kind of leave you in the dark, wondering, gosh, one study says that low carb kicked the low fat study's butt, and one study says the exact opposite. Like, I'm confused. What do I look at? Oh, look at protein. Look at total calories. Then you'll get your answer.
Yeah, the problem is you'll get a lot of media outlets that see just the title, and they kind of run with that, and it's just they're missing all of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've come across just trying to delve deep into this keto world, right? I didn't do a lot of research. I watched a lot of documentaries. Let's put it that way, right? Everything's and I was like watching. I was like, wow, it's amazing how, and it's weird how they basically made this whole low carb, this low fat thing back in the day, like the biggest thing in the world, and how the carbs were the actual enemy to this. It was just weird. And again, you just brought it up. Like I don't remember thinking about how much protein was actually taken in. I didn't even think about that. I just thought they were just battling it out as to which calories are more efficient, right? Is it just a high fat, Dr. Atkins and stuff like that? How huge that came into play 20 years ago. And that was a huge thing. And I'm just now I'm really thinking. I was like, wow, I never thought about the third side to certain things. There's those three sides to the story: yours, theirs, and the truth. So it's like, I'm like, oh, okay, that's another way. I feel like we are really uneducated, or we just don't have that. I guess you could say the third eye, the third fresh eye as to what should be there, and no one wants to read that deep into it, and it's hard. It's hard to read that deep into it, especially if you're not that into it. I mean, it's just
right.
If you're not, like you said, nerdy sticking into this whole thing, it's hard, And so
it's like people want to be. It's like, just to get me to the moon, You don't have to explain the physics of it,
Right.
type of thing.
Yeah.
I like using my phone, but I don't give a shit how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
You know, it's like, you know, trying to get, they want instant gratification. And it's really hard to explain these things. It's, you know, that's just another point of view. It's like, oh, wow, I never thought about that point. That's, that sucks now. Now the whole world.
Just think about telling somebody, okay, all I want you to eat is fat and protein. Just cut out all the carbs. But all you get to eat whatever protein and whatever fat you want. So it's super simple. It's a no-brainer. But what ends up happening is they typically end up doubling the amount of protein they used to eat because they don't have a whole lot of options.
Right.
So they end up doubling the protein, and they were likely consuming a suboptimal amount of protein. And with protein being the most satiating macronutrient of the three, then it's hard to disentangle what's really working here. They're doubling their protein or they're cutting out of the carbs. And so there's different things at work here, you know? So yeah, just knowing simple stuff like that. I think that the general public can benefit from that. And certainly trainers in the field who are not necessarily looking to become clinical nutritionists or registered dietitians, they can know some of those basics that go quite a long way.